How are you, Tom?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so good to have you here. Yeah, so thank you for sticking around. I know it's been a long day. I've been looking forward to this fireside chat for a long time because, when we think about software development and what's changing in the new paradigm, Tom, or Tomo, that's how he likes to be called, is really a legend. He has been at the forefront of several chapters of software development transformation. He started building internet at scale, where he spent a decade at Meta. And
it was Facebook the whole time I was there, so
Yeah.
I just refused to stick with the rebrand.
But now, we have really young people who may not know what Facebook was. And
I'm older than I look,
yeah,
it's true.
and he played a big role in React and really the modern way of building the web. And so he's closely affiliated with the growth of the React ecosystem. And certainly he's also now driving this next wave of shift toward AI native software development, being the CPO of Vercel. And one thing Tom and I have in common is we both have the title of CPO, but another commonality is he's really a CPTO, and I used to run engineering as well. It's just, I'm not doing that at Datadog, but have done that for a long time. So, today's talk is really about what's happening in the software space. It's become a more, agentic, and what's the implication for developers, for organizations, for enterprises. So let's start with the first discussion around the developer workflow has fundamentally changed. So Tom, let's start with something that is becoming clearly obvious. The way we build software today is different when compare how you build it at Meta. So tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah. So I spent a long time, a big chunk of my career working on open source frameworks. And frameworks, the whole point of frameworks was to enable you to not focus on the things that are undifferentiated, but to instead focus on the things that sit on top. So your ideas, the first library I ever worked on was something called MooTools. And the whole idea was, well, supporting lots of different browsers is really hard. I want to just focus on my thing and not worry about the differences between IE6 and browsers. And so we were constantly raising the level of abstraction to make it so that you could focus on your idea, the thing that is different, the thing that is unique, and spend less of your time focusing on the undifferentiated underneath, right? So when React came along, we saw an opportunity to go even further. So now it's not even about, it's about raising the level of abstraction to where you no longer need to think about how to update your views in your application. You can just focus on, here's what my application should look like at any point in time. So we raise the level of abstraction one more time. And now what's happening with AI is, especially the coding agents are getting so good that the sort of frameworks and even programming languages that are output are almost an implementation detail of the idea. So I really see this as the sort of logical evolution and the logical conclusion, maybe, if you will, of enabling us to stop focusing on the things that are uninteresting and undifferentiated underneath and really focus on our ideas. So the biggest thing that's changing is we can build things so much faster, and the gap between, or the distance between intent and actual implementation is just collapsed completely. So it's kind of really interesting to explore what else changes in a world where I have an idea and I can make it real, almost for free, right? Software is free now is a provocative statement we have. What else changes in a world where the distance between intent or idea and implementation has collapsed almost to zero? Everything else kind of changes.
Yeah, that's amazing, and certainly that influenced how we started to think about building product. Previously, product development is a very iterative process. We build, we test it with customer, we go back and iterate, and now you can build and rebuild. Because building is becoming so fast.
Yeah, the roles are really interesting too, right? And I know this is one of the things that a lot are talking about is the difference in responsibilities between a product manager and an engineer and a designer. And you used to have this sort of pipeline of process, right? So you'd come up with a hypothesis, you'd gather information from customers, you'd put together a spec, you'd send it to start working with the designers to start, what is it going to look like? The designers would iterate on their designs. They'd send it to engineering. Now you have a spec and some designs. And it became this sort of like pipeline, if you will. And then obviously that's really a loop, right? Because then you feed more context back in. But now what's happening is it's almost like random access, right? Like you have the product managers can actually like implement high fidelity prototypes really quickly. Engineers can get something that looks pretty good by default. And designers can do implementation and strategic thinking about the product. So everybody's kind of like doing a little bit of all of it. And instead of having this very clean sort of handoff process, things are dramatically more compressed and a little bit more, sort of ambiguous in terms of, is it really like, do I really have to stay in my lane or can I kind of color outside of it? So we're seeing this really interesting, I guess you could call it a disruption, but really interesting empowerment of each of these roles to be able to do a little bit more of each of the other roles, which has been kind of fascinating to observe and absorb.
It's interesting to see, how these different roles start to blend and get into each other's territory. But what I have seen is also some of the core functions still remain. So, for example, for product managers, now they have the ability to build, but their fundamental job is to understand market, customer demands, how to build a product that become a major business. So I actually sometimes tell my product manager, it's great that they can turn things into a prototype, but building the actual product in production, that's really in their, for them, building means creating the idea, but not necessarily building the end product, especially a product like Datadog that's really mission critical. Yeah. I wonder if you feel the same way, or you're seeing even more blending between these roles. I know design's role is changing as well. For Datadog, what we've seen is a lot of our designers are actually becoming front-end engineering owners as opposed to just design.
Absolutely. First, on the sort of product management side of things, just because you gained a new superpower doesn't mean you're not responsible for the same things you were previously, right? Defining what success looks like and clear problem statements and understanding what customers really need, and like specifying in detail like how these things are supposed to work and why and how we measure success and all of that. Absolutely still the job. Oh, and by the way, you can build the V0 of whatever it is yourself now. You don't have to wait for engineering resources to become available anymore, right? So just because we've given everybody, including our product owners and product managers, new superpowers, it doesn't mean that you don't still have to do fundamentally a lot of the same job. And also, even if a coding agent is what's implementing most of your spec, the clearer the spec is, the closer it's going to be to the intent. So you really still do need to do most of that work, but you can now just reach a little bit further, which I think is really empowering. On the design side, we coined this role probably 3 or 4 years ago called design engineer, and it's just so obvious now. So previously it was designers who were really versed in front-end languages and technologies. And now what's interesting is like, the frameworks and the technologies underneath, whatever's being output by the coding agents, they're almost an implementation detail again, but that eye for detail, that care, that craft, that, how it works, not just what it looks like, being able to do more and more and more of that has been really empowering for designers. And then one of the things I appreciate is like we have a bunch of back-end engineers building a bunch of infrastructure and services, and now the control planes and dashboards and things that they output don't look like complete shit anymore because the default quality output by tools like V0 is actually quite good now. So everybody can do a little bit more, and they can stretch into the other disciplines. That doesn't mean the core job duties that were required are no longer required. It just means implementation details like syntax and remembering those quirks of those frameworks, those things are no longer as important. And by the way, they were never differentiators anyway. They just enabled certain engineers who knew them to move a little bit faster. Yeah. Well, we've sort of leveled the playing field in that regard.
I have to share a story. In one of our recent design review, we were providing some feedback to the design team about a design element, and our CPO, Alexi, just immediately mock up a design using AI and bringing the whole idea alive right in front of the whole team. So I want to...
I have the same story. Yeah. We were in a review. We do these weekly reviews with the leadership team about a certain product. And this was for a specific new surface inside of our dashboard. And while we were in the meeting, the CEO was like, no, not like that, like this, and started sharing screen with the prototype of the version that he had in his head to sort of give the team some direction. And then they were able to take that and be like, okay, obviously we're not going to production with your thing, but that's going to inform much more viscerally, much more concretely exactly what we need to do next with the next iteration. So that ability to communicate through these like vibe-coded prototypes and such has been really, really empowering for our team.
Yeah, so clearly we are doing a lot of vibe coding. Everybody's becoming a builder, using platform like V0. But there's still a fundamental difference between vibe coding something versus production. You talk about building has become almost free. Production is definitely not free. And this is definitely something we've experienced at Datadog. A big part of a lot of the discussion we had this morning at our keynote is how to accelerate not just the building part, but also for the code to get into production reality, production quality much, much faster. How are you guys doing that within Vercel? What does that AI flywheel really look like when you need to launch something? Especially you're also doing a lot of infrastructure stuff.
Yeah. There's a difference between sort of like greenfield, net new stuff and prototypes and ephemeral software and internal tools and business apps, and our production platform on top of which some of the most important workloads in the world sit, right? We're not going to vibe code new infrastructure that underpins financial institutions with trillions of dollars of assets under management, right? So what we do is we use AI to still human judgment, still human design, still human spec. We use AI to accelerate the existing process. Last talk was talking about how something that used to take weeks for a team now maybe takes one person a day. Well, all of the verification we used to do on something that took weeks, we still have to do all of that. And even when it's augmented by AI, we need all of the observability and all of the plugging into our existing verification systems. And we need a lot of still human review, even when it's human review assisted by AI. It's not, just because you can produce something really quickly doesn't mean that that's the foundation on top of which we're building society, right? Like everything actually has to have quite a bit of rigor still. And so I like to describe the work that we do at Vercel as falling into one of two wavelengths. There's this sort of like long wavelength foundational work that we do, which is our core platform, and making our core platform better, higher quality, more resilient, more performant, more efficient. More secure. And that work, I think, even in a world where AI is helping us author changes to that, the level of rigor and observability we have at that layer is extremely high. The other wavelength of work we're doing is sort of net new, greenfield, speculative stuff. By definition, no one's depending on it, so it has this very spiky nature, right? Something might be very hyped and very interesting. Something might not go anywhere. And we decide whether or not to invest more in it if it really looks like it's going to work and be part of a broader narrative. If you only have this long wavelength foundational work and you're not doing anything spiky and exciting, this might be seen as sort of boring. But if you only have this sort of spiky work, it can be seen as sort of noisy and not something you can depend on. But together, these sort of, I'd say this forms the music of Vercel, which is you have to have both of these. Innovation that becomes the hardened stuff. And the way that we use AI in both environments is just different. So over here in the spiky stuff, we're just, let it rip. We'll just YOLO ship net new products and features that we're trying out and seeing what works in the world. And we'll use AI end to end for those things. But these systems, we're very much using AI as one tool to augment human institutional knowledge and rigor and all of the sort of observability and testing and care that goes into building something that others can depend on.
Yeah, I love the way you describe it with this long wavelength work versus those spiky and ephemeral type of work. But we have the ambitions of even automate and optimize that long wavelength to make it short. Because if we think about everything human does, they're performing a task. Hopefully, we can optimize a way and automate with AI. So today we were talking about, we're building this release agent, if I think about the days I used to write PRs and how you not only raise the PR, but you run tests, you go through your CI/CD, then you resolve merge conflicts, and then when it's time to push it into production, you're carefully, either putting a flag behind it or running experiment to see how it's going to perform. Yeah, we're actually trying to take this human process and make it agentic. And I think the key thing of making this long wavelength shorter is to be able to bring those production contexts back into that process. So you're at all the time, you're getting that feedback as opposed to running in blind.
100%. We used to have a really large release engineering team at Facebook. And the whole point of that team was to just release the software. So everybody's building the software, and then release engineering is going to package it up and deploy it to all those machines in production. And most of what that team ended up having to do is look at the charts and graphs and monitor everything. And then if something went wrong, they'd flag it, somebody would diagnose, and then they'd try to do a rollback, but that was a very complicated process. That is exactly the type of work that human beings should not have to do. And if you let that team work on anything else, I promise you, they would gladly have worked on anything else. So that's the type of these automated agentic rollouts. Oh, chef's kiss, right? That's the perfect project for an agent to just own, and the perfect process, for an agent to own. And I think that collectively we all get leveled up when we don't have to think about monitoring those things.
Yeah, certainly. When I think about my days of VP engineering, there are two types of events that get my attention: major incident, or CI is blocked for extended period of time. And so we are definitely trying to use AI to make both those dramatic experience increasingly better. So Tom, I would love to talk about a little bit on the infrastructure front, especially knowing what Vercel is doing. You're not only giving developer that platform, but you're also offering this architecture, this infrastructure that's optimized for this new generations of software. So what do you think, are the key ingredients of this new generations of infrastructure?
Yeah, so Vercel's sort of claim to fame for a very long time was something called framework-defined infrastructure. And it was the cornerstone of what we called the front-end cloud, was this framework-defined infrastructure. And the whole idea was, rather than infrastructure as code or you manually provisioning things or scaling your own Kubernetes cluster, you just author your application using one of 50 or so frameworks. And we built the glue code that turns that application into something that can run in production at scale and scale up and down automatically. So for example, if you have some data fetching code in your framework, we would automatically spin up a Vercel function that whenever the request comes in for that page, we would execute that function to fetch the data. If you have static parts of your application, we would automatically globally deploy them to any cache in any network near the users. And if you had complex routing rules, we would, in our proxy, deploy those routing rules to route your users to the right part of your application and all that. So all of this was extracted from the application. But these immutable deployments were this one and done thing. It was very much a CI/CD pipeline, where the pipeline starts with the application code and it ends with the production running application. And then what happens? Well, we observe logs, we look at things, we improve things, we have new features, and then we do it again, and we create a new deployment. And what we're doing now with what we call agentic infrastructure is we're kind of closing the loop back around with all of the insights we get from production. Right, so imagine that this is a real story. We had an e-commerce retailer who does not do business in one specific geo. They just can't sell there yet. And so they started getting inundated with traffic from that region. And they're like, well, we're serving all of this traffic that we can't service it. We can't sell to this region. And so what ended up happening was the Vercel agent came in and said, hey, I'm seeing a spike in traffic from this region. Here's a firewall rule if you'd like to block or throttle that traffic so it doesn't run up a bill on something that you can't even generate revenue from. So I think what's happening here is we can talk about the building blocks of building agents and AI apps. But one of the building blocks, I think, of infrastructure itself is going to be that the infra can no longer just be this thing that sits there. it has to be intelligent. It has to be self-improving and self-optimizing and self-securing. So what I mean by that is, we now have an agent that is constantly monitoring our core web vitals all the time. And anytime there's any type of regression, it does the bisect to figure out where it came from, and then submits a pull request to make sure that we either fix forward or we revert whatever caused the regression.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing what you just described. This morning, we actually announced a new capability called BIS infrastructure operations. It's kind of does something very, very similar to make infrastructure self-optimizing, self-driving.
Yes. Yeah, and we coined the term self-driving infrastructure a while back. I wrote a blog post about this. I've stopped calling it self-driving infrastructure because I got sick of answering questions about if Vercel is building a car now. But you get the metaphor. Everybody in this room, I think, gets the metaphor. But this autonomous infrastructure, I think, is going to be really key, right? Because as we produce more and more software, and software becomes even more ingrained in everything we do and part of the fabric of society, I think that the cloud needs to take on more of the operational burden. So whereas I used to have a team that would go and optimize these things and look at the logs and refine and improve, now most of that investigation should be done for us automatically, and we should get the suggestions either in the form of a pull request or a new firewall rule or a new configuration modification. But all of that stuff should be, the insights should come to me. I shouldn't have to go find them anymore. So this is what I think is going to become within the next year or two sort of table stakes for all of the clouds.
That's amazing to hear. And speaking of self-driving, I have a fun fact for the group. I actually used to work on self-driving trucks.
I heard that.
Before Datadog. And maybe I'll ask a question to you and to the audience. Do you think self-driving infrastructure is harder or self-driving trucks are harder? Self-driving trucks, think about something 80,000 pounds running at 70 miles per hour down the highway with no human driver behind it. What's harder? What do you think?
I mean, I'm biased, but I think self-driving infrastructure is much harder.
Yeah.
But actually, I think, certainly when these self-driving startups came about, it was insurmountable thinking about how you were going to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And as technology got better and better, I think especially computer vision, and we got more and more compute capability, I think it started to be like, oh my gosh, this could really happen. Yeah. And it seemed like for a while, at least the highway version of the self-driving trucks was a tractable problem. Like there's a series of things we need to solve. It's a finite-ish list. But then production presents itself with the anomalies and the unexpected. So I'm actually curious to hear some stories from that about we didn't plan for golf ball-sized hail.
Yeah, so we can talk about self-driving trucks all day long, but I know we're here to talk about infrastructure, observability, and AI development. It turned out, I actually think self-driving trucks are easier than self-driving infrastructure. Why? If you think about what goes into the truck, how you control a truck, there are fundamentally only 3 controls: accelerate, braking, and steering. So yes, you need to understand your surrounding, recognize hails and humans and all of that, and that's hard. But fundamentally, the control you have is only 3 things. Think about how many controls you have in your infrastructure. As we build the infrastructure operations tool, we're looking at a menu of hundreds of infrastructure actions that we need to fully validate. It's actually a much harder problem to solve, even though it doesn't kill people if you size up your infrastructure incorrectly. But the complexity is actually much, much higher. That's why there are driverless trucks running on the road. There's still people behind infrastructure. So kudos to you for building self-driving infrastructure.
Kudos to you for paving the way with those self-driving trucks, which are incredibly impressive.
Yeah. We talked about earlier, transforming product development. I think a lot of the people here are also thinking about, what is the AI impact beyond product development? And when I talk to you regarding things happening at Vercel, I see you guys not just as an AI native development organization, you're really an AI native enterprise. So maybe tell us how you think about transforming the whole company.
Yeah, the journey here has been really interesting. About 3 years ago, we had an idea for an app that was not unlike ChatGPT that would allow you to go from text to UI component. The unlock that we had, the realization was these LLMs are very good at outputting English, but they're also very good at outputting React and Tailwind CSS, very specific CSS and JavaScript frameworks. Not just because they had been trained on lots and lots of data, but because those were conducive to the same sort of like token prediction that English language was. So we start building V0, and it's looking really, really good. It was not a full application development studio. Vibe coding hadn't been coined yet. But we solved the blank canvas problem, which is like, I know I want to build this thing, but like, where should I start? What should it look like? And historically, what we would do is you'd start with some UI library off the shelf, and you'd be like, yeah, here's a template, or here's a something. And then you'd at least not have to look at a blank canvas. You could start with something. Yeah, I needed like a menu and a button and a whatever. And what V0 enabled us to do was start thinking about the new tools we're going to need in order to work with large language models and in order to work with the output of those large language models. So we started building, as part of the front-end cloud, we started building a couple of new tools. Excuse me. One of the new tools we needed was, we were actually quite frustrated every time a new model was released because we had to go and change our product code, right? So we're like, oh God, like Anthropic, what are you doing? Another model, right? So we wanted to try out the latest and greatest. And then in June of 2023, we actually released something called the AI SDK. And the whole point of the AI SDK was to make it so that without changing our product code, without sending a pull request, we could actually try different models for, at the time, we only had one input. But then over time, we had different models that we wanted to use that were good at different things. V0 had this prompt enhancement thing, and GPT was way better at prompt enhancement. But Claude was way better at code generation. So in our code base, we would use Anthropic for this, we would use OpenAI for this, and it was great. The AI SDK, for the past 3 years, we've just doubled down on investing in it because every app that we build now is gonna need to use multiple models. And we just published some findings yesterday that the average production workload is using 35 different models that we're seeing running through, and I'll talk about another one, Gateway. So, model choice is no longer there was a new one released, let me use the latest one. It really is about how your application behaves and what trade-offs you're making: price, performance, accuracy, precision, et cetera. So AI SDK, we built this thing. Then we needed to centralize all of the tokens we were getting through a single key because we had this proliferation of developers just creating their own keys from the different providers. And it's impossible to do cost governance or tracking or analytics or anything. So we built the AI Gateway, which allows you to centralize your spend, and then you get automatic failover and observability and all these other great things. Now I ask companies, I don't even say which model you're using or which provider, I say which gateway are you using? Because AI gateways are now the CDN of the modern era. Yeah. We invented CDNs for a reason. We could go down that rabbit hole if you want.
That will date us.
Yeah, exactly. And then we needed this sandbox primitive for untrusted code execution. And then we needed workflows because agents actually need to run long-running jobs, not just the request-response model of the web of the past, right? So we needed all these new primitives, and we sort of woke up one day and we're like, oh my gosh, we built all of the infrastructure you need for building AI apps and agents. So we call that collection of goods the agent stack. And I think this transformation for us, now we have all these new tools in our tool belt. Well, how can we actually transform the enterprise using the tools that we used to build V0 and some other things? And so we have this GTM engineering team, and their job is to just make our go-to-market engineering or our go-to-market team's lives easier. And so we have built all of these tools that help us do our job better and faster, and with fewer people having to do that manual labor that no human likes to do. So just rounding it out, we built several agents. The first one is what every company is building, which is a support agent. You can try to buy one of these off the shelf. We call those agents as a service. We love the acronym. But agents as a service didn't work for us. They didn't know about our context. They didn't know about our systems. They didn't know about our products. So we had to build our own support agent. And then we hill climbed that thing from 40% resolution rate on tickets to 93%.
Wow.
And what happens when you do that is the team that receives the tickets now has to be a different shape of team. they're much more technical because everything that gets through is either a gap in the platform or a feature request or a configuration that needs to be looked at by a human. No more of the boring stuff ticket takers used to do. And then we built lots and lots and lots of other agents. I think we've built about 200 on top of this agent stack now. So Vercel like quietly went from this like web hosting company 5-10 years ago to this like agentic infrastructure provider where we happen to be a great place to build and deploy agents that will help you transform your business and make it more efficient.
That's amazing.
A long-winded answer.
Amazing to hear.
Question.
We've always associated Vercel, with developers, development, and et cetera. But it's exciting to see that your go-to-market engineering team has been so prolific. We have a little bit parallel in Datadog. We have gone through a lots of different functions, building a Deodex review agent just for them, or various sales agent, customer support agent, and we're going through that phase of how we go from everybody becomes a builder to truly productionize them, because there's a lot of common patterns, and we want to make sure our sales team are really selling, as opposed to everybody is burning the midnight oil and building agents. And it's really exciting to see, but we are trying to identify what are those common patterns and turn them into durable apps.
Absolutely. We did a company offsite. It was so fun. We said, we asked everybody at the company, what is the part of your job that you hate doing? And we just extracted a bunch of those things and we built agents. And all of those people now, no one was wanting for work, right? All of those people who we made their lives a little bit better, we made them more efficient, they now have more interesting work they get to do. So we're really deploying, Vercel is still actively hiring even in this world, right? And the whole idea is we're not trying to replace humans, we're trying to make them more efficient and take the parts of our job that we don't like doing because they're repetitive or manual, and we're trying to build and leverage agents to do those parts of our job.
What are some of those examples? It's not to say the jobs don't exist. It's just, we don't have to do those work. Where do you see the biggest payback?
And this is another kind of common one. You see the AI SDR, the AI BDR billboards all over the place. But again, agents as a service didn't work for us. Your mileage may vary. But we had this inbound sales thing. So anytime anybody clicks contact sales, what would happen is a lead would go into a form, and then a team of about 10 SDRs would go through that and just pluck them off and do a bunch of research and try to create a sort of personalized outreach email. And you talk to the team and you say, what part of your job do you not like doing? And they're like, this is so manual. It's the same thing. The first 100 that I did, it was kind of okay. I'm learning about new companies and new people. But then they're like, well, all of this should be able to be automated. I don't want to do this work anymore. So we worked with that team to build the inbound sales lead agent. And the thing performs so much better than any of them, and they don't have to do that work anymore. Most of them moved on to much better roles. One became an account executive, there's a sales engineer, some joined our CSE team. So that
they're
was
moving from these highly repetitive work to now the work that's requires human touch, and
it involves
high value.
Actually working with other humans. Actually, this is one of the things we're finding out is anything that, any work that required that you process data in a list, or it didn't require actually talking or working with other humans, we're trying to automate some of that stuff away so we can spend more of our time working with humans. Another one is we have this agent called Deal One, and effectively what happens is we have this very in-depth process and system for collecting all of the transcripts of the calls, and then coaching our our account executives on what they could be doing better, what they might have gotten wrong. So it's kind of this agent that coaches our account executives on understanding Vercel better and being more helpful to prospects and customers. And we built this entire knowledge graph and all this stuff using that agent stack that I mentioned earlier. So Deal One has replaced a lot of different systems. And forecasting, sales forecasting. I mean, we built 100 plus agents that we're now kind of coalescing into one super agent, the Vercel agent.
We had a similar example. Obviously, Datadog, we've been shipping lots of product. Our AI roadmap and messaging has constantly been progressing. And rather than going through this, spending a few months to develop a messaging and spend the next few months enabling all of our field, we decided, why don't we train an AI agent? And so we can constantly feed it with the most up-to-date information.
Exactly.
So we talk a lot about using different type of AI agent, whether it's software development agent or these other agents. And you talk about having 200 agents already in your environment. Today's organization is still designed to manage people. What is going to be the right operating model for this future of organizations have human and also AI agent? I'm already seeing some of these shifts, for example, in our software development organization. We're moving to a model where it's very micro team, small team moving really fast with the help of AI agent, and they're doing macro tasks because rather than, software is very fine-grained, enter every lines of code, running every test, now you give it a prompt to do some much bigger things. And we're definitely seeing that happening across all the different software development organizations. So how do you think of the future operating model for companies look like?
Yeah, that's very similar. I think the company as an idea is an abstraction that is all centered around this idea that I can only do so much as an individual. And if I want to do more, I need to organize with other people who want to do the same thing. And so I think what's going to happen is there's going to be more companies that are going to be smaller than they used to be, but they're going to be just as ambitious as they used to be. Within our organization, I think what's happening is, like you're describing, there's smaller, tighter teams where fewer people have more of the context in their head, and there's a little bit less of this sort of like required, well, that's not my job, like that's some other team or some other function. I still think you have these sort of like functional areas, but I do think that, especially as we talked about the individual functions inside of EPD being sort of blurred together, you're going to have smaller, tighter teams that can just do more with less. But you're still going to have, I don't envision a world where I have this fleet of agents that I'm commanding that replace all of the people that used to be responsible for very, very different jobs. You're still going to have people that are responsible, but they're going to use agents to do the body of work that they're responsible for more effectively or faster. Hopefully, we use AI to develop software that is higher quality. It's not just about throughput. Actually, we should be using AI to produce higher quality software. But there's still going to be a person that is responsible for all of the sort of orchestration and coordination. So, concretely, I think we're going to have smaller teams that do more interesting work. Less of the manual, repetitive, kind of boring work that we could automate away. And that means that we're going to have more, hopefully, more interesting cognitive problems to solve. And we're going to spend more time on, should we build that, or should it be like this, or should it work like that? And so, everyone's job is going to change a little bit at a time, and we have to sort of embrace that change when it comes. But yeah, I don't see it's going to be a while before we have the single person that just commands a fleet of agents and builds a $1 trillion business. We'll see it.
Yeah, we will see if that's the future of the world. And I love the way you say it about making sure we still know what to build. Yeah. Build the right thing. That often is a much bigger problem than the actions of actually building it, because that one is being accelerated tremendously. But the decision, making those high quality decisions in highly ambiguous situations about here's why we do this, not that, that is still extremely human.
Yeah, I love the evolving sort of, it seemed like thousands of thought leaders all at the same time had this great idea, taste is the new moat. And it was just like, you'd see it and you'd just like eye roll. It's like everybody is saying, why is everybody tweeting the same thing? Taste is the new moat. But actually, like, the moat is going to change, and I think judgment and restraint are going to be a big piece of that. Our CTO told a story recently. He's like, over the holidays, I built 3 different databases, and I've deleted them all because the world doesn't need 3 more databases vibe coded by a CTO. So I think judgment and restraint are going to be important. One of the other things I think is going to be really important is all the rest of the work around the work. You used to take it for granted that like, oh, I just build the thing and now I hand it over to marketing and sales enablement and sales and they can figure the rest out. But now more and more of that, you want to be actually involved. And then I actually think like trust is going to be really important here. Brand equity is going to pay dividends, right? people can trust a company like Datadog. People can trust a company like Vercel. So these new up-and-comers, I think they're going to have to find ways to rapidly earn trust rather than just, oh, we built another thing. It's like, well, anybody can build the thing. Why should I trust you? So that'll be interesting to see that play out.
That's great. I think that's a great way to sum up this conversation. So what I hear is, high quality decision making. We call it judgment, and then trust.
Yeah.
That's trust of brand, trust between teams, between people. Yeah. That's fundamentally the long-term mode.
Absolutely.
So, thank you, Tomo. It's been a treat to have this conversation with you. And I'd like to thank you for the audience in the room, as well as online, for being part of this conversation and for coming to Dash. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.